You are listening to Abnormal Spaces.
I'm Donnie.
I'm Ryan.
In this podcast, we discuss conceptual realities, the researchers, authors, and explorers who describe and define them, as well as our personal experiences in these abnormal spaces. In this episode, we discuss Douglas Harding's seminal work on having no head and its instructional revelations into self-awareness, self-actualization, and non-duality.
Go ahead and keep talking.
Okay, I'm going to keep talking.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little more there.
Hey, I like that. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're good there.
Yeah, that's good. Good level. So we had talked before about non-duality, and you had mentioned Douglas Harding. I think this guy's pretty fascinating. I had never heard of him before. I didn't know anything about him. And the more I looked into it, the more interesting and fascinating he became. This guy lived to be 98. He was less than a month shy of his 99th birthday. Good long life. But what's really interesting to me is he was raised in this Christian sect called the Exclusive Plymouth Brethren. And the exclusive part is important because this religious teaching took the Bible pretty literally, and they did not want labels. So if you were a believer and a follower of Jesus Christ, then you are a Christian, not a Catholic, not a Protestant, not anything else. You're a Christian. They wanted it to be very open for anyone who was a believer, but they did not want any of the believers to practice rituals, which is really interesting because all religions have ritual components, and all indigenous tribes, everybody has some kind of ritual that they do. It's just what humans do. And so this group of people wanted to just get together and discuss the Bible, and that was it. So anyway, real quick too, the reason that I put the emphasis on the exclusive is there was a schism within the Plymouth Brethren. And so there's another group called the Open Plymouth Brethren. They were a little more lax. But anyway, so he belonged to the exclusive. And at the age of 21, he wrote a 10-page thesis with a lot of questions for the elders. And they kicked him out. They said, nope, you can't ask those questions. You're out of here. And that's crazy, too, because he was a very, very intelligent and contemplative person. So although I didn't get to read that thesis, my assumption is that it was pretty spot on and has a lot of the questions that a lot of people that are brought up in different faith practices end up having at one point. So anyway, so he's kicked out. He becomes an architect. He was living in England and ended up moving to India during World War II, and he practiced architecture there. But that's when he really started to explore spiritualism. And there is some mysticism in the exclusive Plymouth Brethren, but not a lot. I mean, there's some Christian mysticism. He already had a little bit of that underpinning before he went to India, but he was able to find a lot of clarity and achieved enlightenment, if you want to call it that, in the Himalayas, hiking. And I think that is so cool, that story about him, like, just realizing, you know, that you are the awareness. I cannot remember the artist's name, but there was a picture drawn or painted or whatever. I think it was drawn. It looks like a sketch from like the late 1800s, which was the view from the left eye. And that picture is a perfect encapsulation of what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And it's really neat. But yeah, he realized he didn't have a head.
Yeah, that's pretty much the whole story. And then he spent the rest of his life trying to show others how to realize that they don't have a head. Maybe.
Yeah.
He's just like, yeah, try it.
Yeah. Well, he wrote a book. So he wrote that book called On Having No Head. But he wrote a book before that called The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth. And C.S. Lewis praised it. He said it was, just perfect, brilliant, etc. So I think that's interesting too, because C.S. Lewis, some people have described him as a Christian apologist, but his idea of Christianity really forms a lot of his opinions and views of the world, and etc. So he was seeing this hierarchy of heaven and earth as akin to a lot of the Christian teachings that C.S. Lewis agreed with. So it's really funny that he writes that book, and then 20 years later or whenever it was, he writes On Having No Head, which is just Zen Buddhism, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody, if they're even like 1% interested in this whole whatever non-dual thing or whatever, get his book On Having No Head. It's a short book, it's a short read, and it's a lot of experiments, and they're really practical, and you feel kind of dumb doing them.
Yeah.
But it revealed so much.
Yeah.
Just doing it, because it's like you're a kid.
Yeah.
And we can go into go back to the Bible and, that passage about seeing with the eyes of a child, all that stuff. It's all the same thing. So it's basically like looking directly without thinking.
Yeah.
And when you separate the two things, like when you separate thinking from being, it's a drastic separation. Even though, like right now, it seems like being and thinking is the same thing. It's like you can separate thinking from being awake, and you can separate thinking from actually everything that is. So, what we name, the things, we've talked about this many times, but it's like the things that you can name, they're not that name. And
Right.
just knowing that there are no things, we're using words and thoughts. Thoughts and words to me are pretty much the same thing. Like, maybe there's pictures or whatever, but we take the words to be the thing, and to make things, we have to use words. So the things are the words, but when you take that away and separate them, then you realize that you don't know what anything is, and that there's no thing out there, because if everything's a word, then that means there's just words.
Right.
I'm sure that probably if there were 20 people in this room, everybody'd be like, yeah, no shit.
You're right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But how many people have actually sat with that and tried to separate and contemplate that to the extent where you get freaked out?
Yeah. Well, and I would argue that a lot of people have separated thinking from being so much that they forget that they are being. They're so caught up in their thoughts about, what they did wrong in the past and what's going to go wrong in the future or whatever else. And they kind of forget for a moment that they are just being. And sometimes if you can corral those thoughts, it's easier to just be. One of the things that I thought was really neat is his emphasis on no thing. It's not nothing, it's no thing.
Yeah.
And, just the whole practice of it. Like when you were saying that people should check that book out, it's probably the easiest form of meditation that I've encountered. Mm-hmm. It's like you really get to it like real quick.
Yeah, there's no thinking about it.
Right.
You do the experiment and you're like, seriously?
Yeah, that's it.
And it does something to your view of reality. There's one experiment that he has where it's just you take your hand and you trace around your head, mm-hmm. just your head, and you notice, I'm doing it right now, sorry, and you notice that the whole picture, including your hand, it's contained in this tracing.
Yeah.
I'm noticing that everything that I can see is contained. I don't know how to say this, but there's nothing, even the feeling of my face is contained in that tracing.
Yeah.
And there's nothing outside of that.
Right.
And also that it's just one giant, it's like a giant lens. It's like there's nothing, there's no boundary to it.
Yeah.
This is when you separate the thoughts. Your thoughts go, well, yeah, I'm tracing my head, or yeah, this is my beard that I feel, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Those are all just, that's secondary to actually what the immediate thing that is happening is, that you're paying attention to.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I say separate those out, because, only a thought could try to separate out a thought. I mean, I get that. right?
Yeah.
But we're not giving them attention. So they can do what they want and say what they want, but your attention, which is what you are, is attention.
Right. Yes.
That is the most important part to me, or not important part, but it's the most drastic, impactful part, is that you are attention, and then there is everything that you are aware of, which is everything.
Right.
And you can't be aware of well, okay, this is sticky.
Yeah.
You can be aware of yourself, but it's not you as your thoughts being aware of themselves.
Right.
Because you start to see everything as other, and this is kind of counterintuitive to non-duality. But you kind of have to separate yourself from everything before you realize that you're not separate from anything. It's a paradox.
And that's just it. You go so far to separate yourself that you realize that there is no separation.
Right.
But you have to go through that whole experience and that whole exercise to get to the end where you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Right.
And that was the thing that struck me, as like how much of it is oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Okay. And like the whole idea of the head being just empty space, and like how if you focus on direct experience, you realize that there are so many things that you don't know, can't know, won't know, etc., that you have to focus more on what is happening right in this moment. And that's it.
And that's all you're ever doing anyway.
And that's all you're actually doing anyway.
Right. We're so used to being the thoughts. I think, like, I saw a thing Terence McKenna said. It was basically something like a bacterial overgrowth, and the ego is like that bacterial overgrowth. We've taken ourselves to be this thing that we have never been.
Yeah.
Now it's so overgrown that to say you're not it sounds insane.
Right. Yeah.
He said it way cooler than that.
In his Terence McKenna way.
He's like, it's like I can't even go there. Like, he says so much crazy.
I know.
He says so much good words. No.
There's a part about how you see with one eye, but you have two eyes.
Yeah.
And so in the overlay of the Christian mysticism, which again I think informs a lot of this, which is really interesting that it is Zen Buddhism, but with this like non-expressed Christian mysticism, like just barely underneath, and like just a hint of it, just like the lingering shadow of it or whatever. But anyway, so there's this concept where one eye looks out to the world and sees what it wants to see as far as like reminders of ego and reminders of self and reminders of achievement, etc. And then the other eye that looks inward and really contemplates who you are, and what you are and what you mean. And it goes back to what you were saying, where you have to go so far in one direction to come back around to the other. So you start with, there's this one one vision. And you're like, but I've got two eyes. And you're like, but what if the one eye is in and the one eye is out? And then you realize, but it's still one eye and it's still one vision. And it takes you right back to the only thing I can trust is my direct experience. And that's really the only thing I should be listening to is my direct experience. And I thought that part was particularly illuminating. And we've talked about the direct experience before, and we've talked about how important that is, and how important it is to be in the moment. But that was an interesting way to get back there.
It's like putting the square block into the square hole.
Yeah.
It's like there's no thinking involved in it. There's no philosophy. I mean, he waxes on a lot about stuff, but he's
Sure.
like, but let's get to let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's like, what do I notice when I say I've lost my head? And I would argue that you don't have a head.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he's like, I've never seen my head.
Yeah.
I've seen it in the mirror. He was like, that's not my head.
Right.
From this vantage point.
Yeah.
He's like, when I look in the mirror, I see that person over there in the mirror. But in my direct experience, what I'm looking out of when I pay attention to myself, looking out of myself at that person in the mirror, that's their head.
Yeah.
I still don't see my head.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So there's never any direct proof of a solid head or a brain or a eyeballs,
Right.
or even a nose. Like,
Yeah.
And this is interesting. Like ever since that, I get in these things where, and I actually can't get out of them sometimes, and it's not bad or good, where everything moves, and I'm so acutely aware of it that I don't move, that it's like there's no cutoff point to what doesn't move.
Yeah.
And it's not like I can even separate myself out from the movement. So I'm like, well, okay, my nose is moving if I go back and forth like this. If I go like this with my eyes, the whole scene is moving.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I feel like maybe a dizziness, or like what I would call a dizziness or something, like from moving my eyes around. But I'm still aware of that.
Yeah.
And you keep pushing back and you keep pushing back. It flips your whole shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and if you keep asking those questions, that's where you get. And so and like if you, I don't want to say refuse to believe, but if you're like, okay, I'm just going to evaluate this myself and do just what you did, looking around and seeing the whole world move around while you're sitting still. You're like, well, okay, what really is this? And what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And it all comes back to, perception is reality, and the immediate moment is all that actually exists at any time ever. And so like, this is like the Montessori or kindergarten or whatever, like intro to it. But what's funny is it's really all you need.
It's the whole thing.
It's the whole thing.
And there's an interesting graph that he came up with, and it's like the human body. It's just standing there.
Yeah.
And it's like he divided it. How would you say that? Like he divided it from front to back.
Yeah.
So like basically just sliced from the head down to the feet.
Yeah.
And everything that is the front of your body forward, I am all. I am everything.
Yeah.
And everything behind that, which you don't see or don't experience, I am not.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most impactful things. It still is to me, because I had a long thing with my brother. Maybe this was like a year ago or something. It was about Douglas Harding, actually. And we were driving is another great one, by the way, to do these experiments in, and it's the most freaky.
Yeah.
Because you have all of the motion and it's immediate disappearance.
Yeah.
Once you get into that sort of like a gestalt thing, you realize you're not going anywhere and you're not coming from anywhere. It's like stationary.
Yeah.
And my brother, he asked a couple questions, and then I was like, well, it's like this, I think, man. So like we're driving right now, right? I was like, imagine you're driving your car and you're looking forward. The road's passing constantly. And if you pay attention to your peripheral vision, it's disappearing into nothing.
Yeah.
and this has nothing to do with thinking. This is real time.
Yeah.
It's gone. It's gone. It's gone as it's there.
Yeah.
That's what we mean by no time. Nothing's happening.
Yep.
Okay, so hold on to that for a second. Now, this is really interesting. Look in your rearview mirror. What do you see? And he's like, I see the road and the cars behind me. I'm like, yeah, that's what your mind says. That's what the thoughts say.
Right.
But what's actually happening, you're forward and you're looking at this thing that your mind it's filling in information saying there's cars in the road and everything behind me. And they're duh.
Right.
It's like a duh moment.
Totally. Yeah.
I was like, you can't do this now, but imagine you're parked. You're looking forward. Now you look in your rear view mirror. You see what's represented behind you, or the story of behind you. Now, physically turn around slowly and look behind you, what you think is there. Now you see what was in the mirror,
right.
But now where's the mirror and everything?
Right.
Right?
Right.
So there was never anything behind you.
Yeah.
There never is.
Nope.
There's no behind you.
Yeah.
And that's one that's one that crushed me, because I was like, and that wasn't a Douglas Harding experiment so much. That was kind of one that, I came up sort of with in the moment, and I was like, it got me. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
That's even more impactful, because it's like, now it's real time. It's like, if I turn, whatever's disappearing is what I say is behind me. And when I go to look at what's behind me, everything, the other stuff is gone. Yeah. And it's a memory.
Yeah.
And I can see that.
Yeah.
That picture.
And that picture is just a construction. So
it's a reconstruction in real time.
Yeah.
That I, as attention, am aware of all the time.
Yes.
So I don't move.
I thought it was really cool. Speaking of like behind you and stuff, the experiment where it was the back of a person's head, and then he used it to illustrate how you're not separate from anything. Yeah. So you can see this. You see the back of your own head in this picture. So like it's, I guess it was a photograph, or maybe it was an illustration of the back of the participant's head. And they're like, okay, there's no face there. So, but you're pretty sure that's your head. And this is the way it appears to everyone when you are just the back of a head, not the face, not the eyes. You're not taking anything in, and you're still a part of everything. You're not separate from everything, because that's still you. That was the thing that was weird about it. It's like, that's still you, but you can't tell it's you, really. I mean, you kind of can, because you believe you've seen the back of your head before.
It's the story.
It's the story.
Yeah. It's just a story.
Right. And that's what it all comes down to. Like, and that's why it's like a good beginner thing, but also like that could be the only thing you need. Because if you really sit with all of it, you realize, oh yeah, this is all just stories.
Yeah, there's nothing that isn't a story.
Right.
And none of the stories are true.
Yeah.
That's, absolutely true.
Right. That's, yes. None are 100% true.
They are relative to themselves as a story.
Yes. And they change.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Like, science is going to change.
Yep.
It's going to change, and it's going to change, and things are going to be overwritten just like a hard drive.
Yep.
That's no absolute truth. Like that's just relative truth.
Right.
Based on the stories of more stories. And so the direct experience deepens if you allow it to deepen. And I don't mean allowing it by like, okay, I'm going to allow it. Like, that's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
It's if you say, okay, I'm going to allow it, it's noticing that in real time. Mm-hmm. That's the eye looking in.
Yeah.
The eye looking out, the words coming out of my mouth. It's the thoughts that are streaming. It's everything that moves.
Yeah.
Like, I like to think of it like that. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a very visual person. Everything that moves to me is everything. The muscles in my face and the imagination of what my face looks like right now. I have an imagination of what I look like when I'm talking to you.
Same.
Everybody
does.
But that's not real.
Right.
The direct experience of what's happening has nothing to do with that. Like, you can't know what the other person sees you as.
Right.
And what your face is even doing. You have a vague idea, like, because you've seen it in the mirror before, like maybe you've done this face in a mirror, or you think like, oh, I'm scowling, I need to like lighten up, or what, like you become self-conscious in that way, like body conscious or whatever. And it's just so crazy to me because those are the finer points. You start with Douglas Harding or something like that, and it's just like, point to yourself. Okay, what are you pointing to?
Right.
What's looking at?
Yeah.
Look at your hand. Now look at everything outside of your hand.
Yeah.
Look, and then, and it just goes from that to like, well, now wait a minute. If everything that creates a movement is a step away from what I am, then that's everything.
Yeah.
Everything moves. Everything changes.
Right.
So if everything changes and I don't change ever,
right,
then what am I?
Nothing.
Oh, not even that.
Not even that.
It's always that's Zen.
Yeah.
Zen is a really cool thing to me because I always thought, everybody thinks Zen, la-di-da.
Right.
But Zen is actually living in the question.
Yeah.
Constantly. There's never an answer.
Right.
And so these Zen masters, they're constantly like, they'll literally like pick up a ball and throw it at your face and then you have to catch it.
Yeah.
And that's Zen.
Yeah.
And they'll say like, what is it? They'll throw an orange at you.
Yeah.
You catch it. And they'll be like, what is it? It's always this weird like game.
Yeah.
And it constantly keeps you now.
Right. Well, they're comfortable in the question. That's the thing. And we've talked about this before, how people really want to answer so bad.
Right.
And they're like, just be comfortable within the question.
Yeah. They're like, what is it?
Yeah.
What is it? And then you start to explain. They're like, no, it's not that.
Right.
And they can only show you that by hitting you with a stick.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or, not hard, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or, like what's the sound of one hand clapping?
Yeah. Yeah, all of
those koans or whatever, and they're really interesting, and I really like Alan Watts because of that, because he really dives deep into it.
Yeah.
But he also like presents it in a way where it's really easy to take in for the most part. Like a lot of his stuff to me is just like really, it's kind of like Douglas Harding-esque, only more like philosophical and stuff.
Yeah, it was a lot of the Douglas Harding stuff it almost seems light because it doesn't get too heady on the philosophical stuff, or at least what I read.
Yeah, heady is the worst thing if you're trying to see what you are, heady is the worst place to be.
Right. Yeah, because you're going to overdo it and you're not going to get there.
Once you realize what heady is, none of it's true.
Right.
When I think back on all of these people, like there's Douglas Harding, Ramana Maharshi, these are people that I've really like went down the rabbit hole to, Ken Wilber, Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, yeah.
Byron Katie.
Yep.
I think his name is Atmananda Krishna. He has a thing that they call the direct path. And it really goes into the direct path of things. I mean, I'm talking down to the damn, like, hair of the microscope it's like everything, man. It's experimental as well.
Yeah.
It's not heady at all. It's more like questions. It's a series of inquiries into the nature of what's color.
Right.
And then your mind goes, well, color is this and that. And then it's like, no. Look at the orange on the table. What do you see? Like, what is orange? What makes up the word orange when you're looking at this unknowable thing? Like, what? Orange doesn't do it.
Right, yeah, yeah.
And then you start thinking about color and what's color, and you're like, well, light hits this, and you're like, no, that's a story. Like, everything's just color.
Yeah.
And none of it's separate.
Right.
You don't ever see a line where they separate.
Right.
And they don't come to you and say, we're separate colors.
Right, yeah.
These lines really fuck your mind up.
Yeah.
They stop it.
Right. It's limitations.
And when your mind stops, that's when you see the crack. That's when you become the crack of reality the light, it's just like this little splinter, and you're like, oh. And when you hear like the aha moment, or it's that. It's just like, oh.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're not always huge, but they're little ones. And then sometimes they're huge. Those moments where you're just like, I'm not anything. And as I think this, and as this is coming out, I'm aware of myself as not being that.
Yeah.
And also being that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like, there's so much self-help that can come out of this because you can kind of untether yourself from the stories. And that's, a lot of what Byron Katie does is, helps you to see that you have been telling yourself these stories. So you have created these limitations or these, challenges or whatever. And that's all they are. They're just stories. And I think that, Douglas Harding did a really good job of illustrating by making you inquire yourself and ask questions of yourself and kind of getting yourself there by the questions he tells you to ask yourself.
Yeah, and doing the experiments of, and using your different senses, basically. Like if you take into account that all you are is sensory input, like that's what you think you are.
Yeah.
Right. And thinking that you are is it's a fine sensory input, because I'm completely aware at times that I have nothing to do with what's coming out of my mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Right now.
Yep.
The sound, how it's produced, the immediateness of speaking.
Yeah.
And how I can't prearrange what I'm talking about even right now.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't prepare this.
Nope.
This is completely this is what's happening. I don't have a formula for it.
Right.
And no one does.
Yeah.
I like Greg Good. I don't like teach, but he presents the sort of Krishna Menon, like, direct path in a way where Western folks can get with it. He's like, is it like with thought, is there an off the wings, like if thought's on the stage, like we think like, okay, there's a stage and curtains, right?
Yeah.
And then we think that thought comes out of one side where the curtain's at, and it gets in the middle and it does its little dance, and then it goes off to the other side where the curtain's at, right? That's what we think.
Yeah.
He's like, but have we ever seen that?
Right.
Have we ever seen thought coming from a place and going to a place?
Right.
Or is it just...
Right. Yeah.
Right? Our mind is so good at saying, it came from here, it's going to there. It came from here, it stays for a second, it's going to there. And it has never, ever been that way, and it'll never be that way. And it doesn't matter what you see or what you experience.
Right.
If you experience the craziest shit ever, like aliens riding a god camel, whatever it is, or, just like dragons or whatever, it does not matter. Like, the story will be the same, and it'll be all the same.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny thinking about thoughts having a start and stop, or even like a staging area or whatever, and then, a performance and then off stage. Because the way things happen in our brain, there's a gap, and it's both electrical and chemical. You have neurotransmitters that cross the synapse and, make the connection that begins to form the idea or the thought or whatever. We don't have much control that we're aware of, if any, over those firings and over those gaps. And we have tried pharmacologically to affect the neurotransmitters and how they exchange information. Part of the reason that we sometimes think of it that way is because we have always been told there's a beginning and an end to things. And so because of that conceptualization, then everything fits into that somehow, or we try to force it into that somehow. So we have this idea that there is a thought brewing somewhere, and then it percolates up to consciousness or wherever you can realize it, and then it disappears or gets filed away or whatever. And it's just another silly trapping of the way that we're trying to understand this, and the way that we're kind of confusing what we think we see and what we think must be happening because of what we thought we saw.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole of it. It's a liberating exercise. It's not liberating for your mind, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's taxing.
But you're not your mind. You're not your thoughts. So the only one that would be excited or feel great or feel terrible is the thought.
Yeah.
That's all that's ever going on.
Yeah.
And the thing is, not to beat a dead horse, but I mean, it's a phantom. Like, it's truly, like, thoughts are a phantom. You can never find it. You'll never find it. You can spend eternity looking for it. You'll never find a thought.
Right.
You'll find this ephemeral, like, weird, phantom-like, translucent pictures and maybe a little sound and whatever it is, whatever a memory, we call a memory.
Yep.
You're aware of it, but it's so, you can't grab it. You can't do anything with it. You can't find it.
Right. You can't show it to anybody.
You can't show it to anybody. You can explain it, try to.
Yep.
But that's words.
Right.
Right? We're caught in this grand illusion. It's just an illusion. That's all it is. And it's the most wild illusion. Like,
yeah.
It seems like it's so solid.
Right.
It's almost like somebody had to figure this out. Like, how? And that's the illusion right there.
Yeah.
Like when we say somebody had to put this together.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Why?
This is just too damn perfect to be just random.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what we think of as random even.
Right.
It's just all these ideas, like what one person thinks of as random, maybe another person doesn't. It's so fleeting. And once it has, this is really, really hard to talk about, but once it has arrived, it's gone. So it never has arrived.
Right.
It's like, if you think about the immediacy of speaking, it's a really good one because there's a lot of complicated mechanisms, it seems like it's going on at once, and it involves memory as well as the immediate sound. Right. Because that's what creates the illusion. There is the sound, and then there is like a split-second memory of the word that you just said. Yeah. And you're aware of that, and that's a gap. Yep. But actually what's happening is the sound and then the memory. Yeah. You can be aware of these two different things, and you're like, oh, yeah, well, that memory is what's happening now. It's not sound and memory together. It's sound, then memory, and then the memory just took the place of everything. Right, yeah. In that split second. Yep. So there's no continuity.
There's no continuity. There's no beginning. There's no end. There's no way to figure out where it came from because it didn't come from anywhere. And that's pretty maddening But I like when you corrected yourself when you said it's good. And you're like liberating, because I feel the exact same way. I feel like burdens have been lifted when I think about everything in this way. But I also feel like it's frustrating because part of my nature wants to get to the final resolution or whatever, and that's not possible.
Well, everybody does. I mean, that's what being a person is.
Yeah.
Being a person is getting the thing that can never be gotten.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's the eternal struggle.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's inherent in us because there's been so much in our DNA, I guess. I mean, that's a shitty answer for it, but I think it's just part of the human condition, because listening to so many talks and reading so many books on the shit, like throughout the years, it's just like, well, the person is the duality. It's not that the person can have anything.
Yeah.
It's not that the person can lose anything.
Right.
It's that the person is the problem and the solution to itself.
Right. Yes.
Because it doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
And the whole time you go through your life and you think about your life as this thing that starts and has a middle and an end, and you think that there's something to get and that one day you're going to get it.
Yeah.
That is what keeps you from noticing what you are for eternity.
Yeah.
And eternity is just now.
Right.
And this moment.
Yes.
And it can never be captured.
Right.
It can never be described. Like, now can never be described. We call it now. This has always just perplexed me. Like, we call it now, but it doesn't even touch, like, the word now doesn't even touch what is happening.
And it's all there is.
Like, all of the stories exist because of now. And now is you. That is the whole thing. Now is what you are. Like, now is awareness.
Yeah, you're made up of now.
And, like, we could go further. A lot of these folks, they're like, like Tony Parsons and Jim Newman and all those guys. It's almost like there's different flavors.
Yeah. I've noticed that.
They don't want to feed. They don't even want to give you like a morsel of a dusting of nutrients for your mind.
Right.
They're like, this is not about your mind and you being happy or sad.
Right.
This has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody's saying. But they're saying it in different ways.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me. And it's also confusing to me, of course, because I'm trying to figure out which one's right.
Right. That's the trap.
That's the trap. You see?
Yep.
And so it's called seeking.
Yeah.
And you're always seeking. You're
Right.
seeking to be happy. You're seeking to feel better. You're seeking for health. You're seeking for money. You're seeking for to be content, to be, I'm there now. Like whatever it is. And there's a myriad of ways to get there.
Yep.
You can get there by drinking, but then you realize I'm a fucking crazy alcoholic and now I'm dying.
Yeah.
You can get there by doing, whatever drugs that you want to do, but you're going to get bored of that shit.
Right.
You will.
Yep.
Eating, exercising, sex, whatever it is,
Yep.
It's all seeking
Yep.
to get to a place.
Right.
But you get there and then that wasn't it.
Yeah. And you're not, it's not what you thought it was going to be. So you're like, well, I better do more of this.
Right.
Hello, I'm curious. Who am I speaking with right now?